He had everything. Power, wealth, success. But when a soft whisper, "I wish I had a loving family," broke through his world, it rattled him in ways nothing else ever had. A millionaire CEO walked into a Courthouses for business, but left when a 7-year-old girl whispers to him. He had no idea that single moment would change all their lives forever. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I'm bringing you another story just as interesting and unforgettable as this one. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's continue. Lucas Bennett, CEO of Bennett Enterprises, was a man defined by precision. He lived in a world where emotions were neatly boxed away, far from the mess of human vulnerability. Every decision he made was calculated, every conversation orchestrated, and every encounter, even in the courthouse, was simply a transaction to him. He stepped out of his sleek black SUV, the air sharp with the crispness of early autumn. His tailored suit, a perfect shade of navy, reflected the image of a man in control. He moved with purpose, his strides long and measured, and his face, a mask of detachment, was flawless. Inside the courthouse, he was surrounded by the hum of legal chatter, the clicking of heels on polished floors, and the sound of distant voices echoing in the hallways. It was a place where lives intersected but never truly collided. The same way Lucas's world worked, a sterile corporate existence with no room for personal entanglements. His mind was elsewhere, running through the meeting he was about to attend. He had already signed off on a few important contracts, and there was no real emotional weight to the business he was here for. A divorce settlement, something that meant little more than numbers and terms on paper. As he entered the courtroom, he barely acknowledged the people around him. His assistant, Janet, hurried beside him, rattling off a list of tasks that awaited his approval. He was vaguely aware of the people sitting in the gallery, their faces a mix of tension and resolve. But it didn't matter. They were like all the others. Transactions. Problems to solve. Nothing more. And then, his eyes caught sight of her. In a corner of the courthouse, sitting alone on the edge of a row of seats, was a young girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her small hands clutched a stuffed bear, worn at the edges, but there was an intensity in her eyes that Lucas couldn't place. She was staring down at her shoes, her feet not quite reaching the ground. Her name was Mia. She had been coming to this courthouse for weeks now, shuffling between foster homes, waiting for something that never came. She had learned that people, especially adults, often made promises they didn't keep. So she kept her wishes to herself, tucked away inside a heart that had learned to expect little. But today was different. Today, her wish slipped out of her lips without her realizing it. "I wish I had a loving family," she whispered to herself, her voice barely louder than the rustling of papers around her. The words hung in the air, soft but powerful, and for a brief fleeting moment, they found their way to Lucas's ears. His attention was momentarily diverted, and he turned his head to locate the source of the soft whisper. His gaze locked onto her, Mia, the little girl sitting alone, her eyes downcast, lost in the wish that she didn't dare say aloud to anyone who might listen. The words, unspoken yet clear, dug deep into the heart of the man who had mastered the art of closing himself off. There was something about her, something in the way she sat so small, so alone, that caused a ripple in his otherwise controlled world. His hand, which had been resting on the table, tightened slightly. He didn't understand why, but it disturbed him. Lucas blinked, shaking his head as if to clear away the confusion. He wasn't someone who got distracted. He wasn't someone who allowed emotions to interrupt his focus. But those words, the quiet, heartbreaking wish of a child, touched something inside him. Something that hadn't been touched in years. Janet, oblivious to the moment unfolding just a few feet away, continued speaking in a low, rapid voice. "The judge is expected to rule in favor of the settlement today, Lucas. We just need to." "Shoo." Lucas's voice was sharper than he intended as he waved her off, his eyes never leaving the girl. The wish. The longing. It was something foreign to him, something he had forgotten how to feel. Mia looked up at that exact moment, her eyes meeting his for a fraction of a second. For just that instant, Lucas saw a flicker of something vulnerable in her gaze, something raw and unguarded. And just as quickly, the moment passed. She dropped her eyes back down, her shoulders sagging as though the weight of her own wish was too much to bear. Lucas wasn't sure what had just happened, but he felt something shift inside him. It was as though the carefully constructed walls of his life had cracked, just slightly. A faint echo of the boy he used to be, before success, before wealth, before the emptiness of power, whispered back to him. But no. He had no time for this. There were deals to close, meetings to attend. He couldn't afford to be distracted by a child's wish, no matter how deeply it had affected him. The judge entered the courtroom, his presence commanding silence. The world resumed, as it always did, and Lucas returned his focus to the matter at hand. But as the proceedings unfolded around him, the words of the little girl lingered in the back of his mind, haunting him in ways he could not explain. What would you do if you overheard someone's deepest wish? Do you think a single moment can change the course of someone's life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The courtroom buzzed with the usual murmur of lawyers, the shuffle of papers, and the occasional cough of someone too nervous to hold back. Lucas's attention, however, drifted far away from the case at hand. The words that Mia had whispered echoed in his mind, growing louder with every passing second. I wish I had a loving family. It wasn't as if he was unfamiliar with sadness. He had experienced plenty of it in his life: loss, betrayal, the coldness of ambition. But this was different. It wasn't the loss of wealth or success. It wasn't the hollow ache of being unloved by a family that had never truly known him. This was something far purer, more innocent. This was the unspoken wish of a child who had never known the warmth of a family to call her own. As the judge spoke, Lucas's thoughts were a million miles away. His eyes returned to Mia, who was still sitting quietly on the bench, her bear cradled tightly in her arms. She looked so small, so fragile in that vast courtroom, as though she didn't belong in this world of adult decisions and cold legalities. Her gaze flickered around the room, avoiding eye contact with the people nearby. She seemed to be lost in her own world, her eyes far away, like a bird stranded in a cage. Then, as if sensing his gaze, Mia turned her head. Their eyes met once again. For a split second, Lucas felt an unexplainable pull, an invisible thread that linked them, despite the vast differences between their worlds. She didn't smile, didn't speak, but the sadness in her eyes was clear. It was a look that cut through him like a knife, a look that seemed to ask the question that he had spent his entire life avoiding. Are you capable of love? Mia's gaze lingered, and Lucas's heart skipped a beat. The moment felt like an eternity, but it lasted only seconds before she looked away, her face once again falling into the shadows of her own thoughts. The judge's voice broke the silence. Mr. Bennett. The sound of his name, spoken with a slight formality, snapped Lucas out of his trance. Lucas blinked and turned his focus back to the proceedings, but the world felt distant now. He had no idea what had just happened, why this child's gaze had left such a mark on him. He had dealt with difficult situations in boardrooms, with investors, with business partners, but this was different. He had no control over the emotions swirling inside him. A few minutes later, the session was adjourned. Lucas stood, his mind still clouded, his thoughts muddled by the child's words and the way they had stayed with him. He gathered his things mechanically, listening to Janet in the background. Lucas, I've arranged everything for the next meeting. We're on schedule and... Give me a moment, Janet, he interrupted softly, his voice betraying the unusual strain in his tone. He stood for a moment, staring at the bench where Mia had been sitting. She was gone now, her small presence no longer there to tug at his heartstrings, but the weight of her wish lingered in the air. It was a haunting question. Why does it hurt so much to hear something so simple? Later that evening, as Lucas sat in the back of his car, his mind continued to churn. His assistant had gone on about work, but he barely heard her. He wasn't thinking about the next business deal or the million-dollar contracts that awaited his attention. He was thinking about Mia. He reached into his pocket, absently pulling out his phone. There were dozens of messages waiting for him, investors, clients, even his estranged family. But it wasn't any of them that demanded his attention right now. It was her. That single moment. The voice that had whispered the words that had no place in this world of ruthless corporate decisions. I wish I had a loving family. The words echoed again, louder this time, as if demanding an answer. Lucas closed his eyes, taking a slow breath. What could he possibly do? What was he supposed to do with this feeling? He was a businessman. He didn't belong in the world of emotions. He had spent his life building walls, closing off parts of himself that were too painful to confront. The idea of opening himself up to something as fragile as a child's hope, especially a child who had been discarded by everyone else, was terrifying. His phone buzzed in his hand, snapping him back to the present. He looked at it briefly. An email. Another task. A reminder of the world he was used to. He shoved the phone back into his pocket, but the thought of Mia lingered. It wasn't until the following morning that he found himself doing something he never thought he'd do. He called his office to cancel a meeting and found himself driving to a part of town he never ventured to. Mia's foster home was a modest building in a quieter neighborhood, a place that looked more like a shelter than a home. The thought of stepping into that space, of facing the reality of the situation, unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. But something inside him pushed him forward. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was that pull from earlier. Maybe, just maybe, there was something in this moment that could change his life forever. As he parked outside the building, he took a deep breath. He wasn't sure what he was doing here or what he would say, but one thing was certain: he couldn't ignore it. He couldn't ignore the pain that had pierced him for the first time in years. Have you ever felt a connection with someone that you couldn't explain? What would you do if a single moment changed everything for you? Leave a comment and let us know how you would respond to a situation like this. The moment Lucas stepped out of his car, he felt a strange resistance in his chest, as though his own body was warning him to turn back. This wasn't the kind of situation he usually dealt with, an emotional encounter that had no place in his world of numbers and deadlines. He was a man who valued control above all else. Yet here he was, standing on the sidewalk in front of a small foster home, unable to shake the image of Mia's sad eyes and her whispered wish. He took a deep breath and walked up to the door, his steps deliberate but slow. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe a friendly greeting from a social worker or an explanation of the foster care system. Or maybe he thought he'd find something more, something that would justify this strange pull he felt toward a little girl he barely knew. The truth was, he didn't have a plan. He just knew that he couldn't ignore it any longer. But as his hand reached for the doorbell, he hesitated. His breath caught in his throat. What was he doing here? What could he possibly offer? He wasn't qualified to be a father, let alone a part of someone's family. His world was about deals and deadlines, not the messiness of human relationships. He pulled his hand back and turned toward his car, his mind racing. What was he thinking? A loving family? He didn't even know what that meant anymore. His own parents had been distant, emotionally unavailable figures, more focused on business than their son. He had learned early on to keep his distance from emotions, to rely on logic and self-sufficiency. That was the way forward. Anything else was a distraction. But then, Mia's face appeared in his mind again. The look of yearning, the quiet vulnerability in her eyes that had somehow cracked through his carefully constructed walls. It was ridiculous, he told himself. What did he even know about children? About love? He had built an empire on avoiding emotional complications. And now, here he was, about to let a single moment disrupt everything he had worked for. Still, something inside him refused to let go. Was it guilt? Maybe. Or was it simply that Mia's wish had struck a chord with him, one he hadn't realized existed? The truth was, Lucas didn't know. But he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't keep running from it. He turned back around, took a step toward the door, and rang the bell. The door creaked open, revealing a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and a tired smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyeing him curiously. Lucas's throat tightened. I was hoping to speak with a girl named Mia," he stammered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mia Matthews." The woman raised an eyebrow but didn't seem surprised. She had probably seen countless people walk through these doors over the years, most of them, like Lucas, unfamiliar with the world of foster care. "Mia's inside," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "But I should warn you, she's a little withdrawn." Lucas nodded absently, his mind racing. He didn't know why he was here, why he was even making the effort. Inside, the foster home was modest but cozy. The walls were lined with children's artwork, and the soft murmur of other children's voices echoed from different rooms. The atmosphere was warmer than he expected, but it was also quiet. Too quiet. Mia was sitting in the corner of the room, a small table in front of her, a book open but unread. Her stuffed bear lay beside her, worn and well-loved, its fur frayed at the edges. She didn't look up when Lucas entered, her attention fixed on the pages in front of her. Lucas stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure of how to approach. How did one even start a conversation with a child who had been abandoned by everyone she knew? How did he, a man who had spent years avoiding connections, reach across that gulf and offer something real. "Hi, Mia," he said softly, his voice unexpectedly gentle. She didn't respond, but after a long pause, she glanced up, her eyes briefly meeting his. There was no smile, no recognition. Just an almost unsettling quiet. She looked back down at her book, clearly uninterested. Lucas felt a pang in his chest. He had expected some reaction, maybe a look of curiosity, or even confusion, but this silence felt like a wall. A wall that she had built to protect herself from getting hurt again. "I'm Lucas," he continued, trying again. "I was at the courthouse yesterday. You said something. I overheard you." Her eyes flickered for a moment, a flicker of something, curiosity or suspicion maybe, before she looked away again. "I heard you say you wished you had a loving family," Lucas said, his voice softer now, tinged with something he couldn't quite name. Mia didn't look up this time. Her fingers absently traced the edge of the book. The silence between them stretched long and thick. "You don't have to talk about it," Lucas added, feeling awkward. He hadn't thought this through. What was he supposed to say? Was he even allowed to offer anything to a child like her? The silence stretched, suffocating. He opened his mouth to say something else, but before he could, Mia spoke. "I didn't ask for your help," she said quietly, almost without emotion. Her voice was so small, so guarded, that Lucas barely heard it. The words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't anger in her voice, just resignation. She didn't expect anyone to care. She had learned to protect herself from disappointment, from abandonment. Lucas took a step closer, his heart aching for this child who had learned so young that the world wasn't kind, that love was a fleeting thing, often offered but rarely given. "I know," he said softly, lowering his voice. "But I'm here now." Mia didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her eyes, though, seemed to soften ever so slightly. It was a small shift, but it was there. Lucas stayed for a few more moments, his mind still racing, unsure of what he could offer or what had brought him here in the first place. But something had changed. In that brief exchange, he had stepped into her world, and it felt like nothing he'd ever done before. And as he stood there, watching her retreat into the silence of her own thoughts, he realized that this was just the beginning. He couldn't undo the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could help her with her future. Have you ever faced resistance when trying to help someone? What do you think it takes to break through someone's emotional walls? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. The days after Lucas's visit to the foster home were quiet, almost painfully so. His life, which had once been filled with back-to-back meetings, financial reports, and endless tasks, now seemed distant and foreign. He found himself repeatedly replaying his encounter with Mia, her soft voice, her closed-off demeanor, and most of all, the way she had looked at him, as though seeing right through him. It was absurd. He had always known how to navigate the corporate world, how to negotiate, how to persuade, how to outsmart people into giving him what he wanted. But this was something entirely different. How could he help a child who didn't trust anyone? Who had learned, at such a young age, that love was not a guarantee, but a fleeting illusion. As the days passed, Lucas tried to bury these thoughts in the distractions of his work. He threw himself into his business with the same intensity he always had, telling himself that there was nothing more he could do for Mia. After all, he didn't have a place in her life, and he wasn't qualified to be some kind of emotional savior. But despite his best efforts to shut out the growing pull he felt, the thoughts kept creeping back. The memory of Mia's eyes, the vulnerability in them, refused to let go. And then, just as he had convinced himself to move on, fate intervened. It started with an unexpected phone call from the foster care agency. Lucas was in the middle of a meeting when his phone buzzed on the table, the name of the agency flashing on the screen. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him he needed to pick up. "Mr. Bennett?" A woman's voice on the other end said, warm but professional. "This is Claire from the Foster Care Services. We were wondering if you might be able to help us with something. It's about Mia Matthews." Lucas's heart skipped. Mia. He had no idea why they were calling him, but his immediate reaction was both instinctive and irrational. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't sought it out. But now, hearing her name again, his mind spun with possibilities. "She's in a bit of a situation," Claire continued, unaware of the storm her words were stirring inside him. Mia's caseworker has informed us that her current foster family is moving out of state, and she's facing the prospect of being moved again. We were hoping, well, we know you've had some interaction with her, and we wanted to see if you could possibly provide some temporary support during the transition. The words hung in the air. Lucas didn't know what to say. His first instinct was to refuse. He had no experience with children, let alone taking on the responsibility of looking after one. But then the memory of Mia's quiet voice, the longing in her eyes, flashed across his mind. I don't know, Lucas said, his voice betraying the uncertainty he felt. What exactly would that entail? Well, Claire replied, her voice cautious, we understand this is a big request. But it would only be for a short time. You'd be acting as her temporary guardian until a more permanent arrangement is made. We can provide resources, guidance, and help you navigate the process. Lucas was silent for a moment, his mind racing. He couldn't believe this was happening. He had no training in this, no understanding of how to care for a child in need. But somewhere deep inside, he felt the pressure of his own promise to himself. I can't ignore this. I'll consider it, he said, the words coming out more decisively than he felt. The decision was made, and Lucas found himself walking into the foster home again, but this time, it wasn't just a visit. He had agreed to take Mia in temporarily, to help her through this transition. The weight of that responsibility hung heavy on his shoulders. As he entered the familiar home, Mia was sitting at the same table, her eyes glued to the book in front of her. The room felt quieter than usual, and Lucas couldn't help but feel the difference. This wasn't just a temporary visit anymore. This was real. Mia, Lucas said softly, his voice filled with a new kind of uncertainty. I know this is a little strange, but I'm going to be staying here with you for a while. Just until we figure things out. Mia didn't immediately respond. She looked up slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly. She was trying to read him, as though trying to figure out if his words meant anything at all. I know it's not ideal, Lucas continued, his voice quieter now. But I promise I'll do my best to make sure you're okay. Mia didn't speak for a long time, but when she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. Why are you doing this? Lucas hesitated, unsure of how to answer. He wasn't even sure why he was doing this. Was it because of the guilt he felt after overhearing her wish? Was it because something inside him had cracked open the moment he looked into her eyes? I don't know, he said finally, his voice softer than before. Maybe because I think you deserve more than what you've had. I think you deserve to feel safe. To feel like you matter. Mia didn't respond, but for the first time, she didn't look away. She just watched him, her expression unreadable. As the days passed, Lucas found himself navigating a world he had never prepared for. The routine was unfamiliar. The tasks of taking care of Mia, helping her with schoolwork, making her meals, even just talking to her, were outside his comfort zone. But slowly, very slowly, something began to shift. He wasn't perfect. He stumbled. He was awkward. He didn't know how to respond when Mia became quiet or distant. But each time, he found himself trying, just a little more. He learned how to be patient, how to sit quietly beside her when she didn't want to talk. He learned that sometimes, simply being present was enough. And every time he caught a glimpse of Mia's soft smile, or heard her quietly thank him for something small, he felt something inside him stir. Something he had buried long ago. Something he had long believed was lost forever. What would you do if you were suddenly forced into a situation you never expected? Could you rise to the challenge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The weeks following Lucas's arrival at the foster home were strange. Mia had begun to open up just a little, enough for him to see glimpses of who she really was beneath the layers of guarded silence. She wasn't the cold, withdrawn child he'd first met. She was funny in small, unexpected ways, and when she did speak, it was often to express a surprising depth of wisdom for someone so young. But there were also moments when the walls would come crashing down again, and she would retreat into herself, her vulnerability painfully clear. Lucas was learning the ropes of parenting, or whatever this temporary arrangement was, and he found himself unsure of every step. How do you comfort someone who has built walls so high they don't even know how to tear them down? How do you help a child like Mia, who had learned not to trust anyone? One evening, after a quiet dinner that Lucas had prepared, a simple pasta dish, Mia took a hesitant step toward him, holding her stuffed bear close. It was the first time she'd approached him without being asked. She hesitated before sitting next to him on the couch, her eyes flickering toward him, but not quite meeting his gaze. "You never told me why you're here," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas was caught off guard. He hadn't expected her to ask, and yet there it was, the question that had been lingering in the air between them. Why was he here? Why had he agreed to this? He sat back, leaning against the cushions. He had never shared his past with anyone, not in any real way. His wealth, his success, the empire he had built, it had all been about leaving his past behind. But here, in this quiet moment, with this little girl who was slowly starting to trust him, he realized that he could no longer hide. "I wasn't always like this," Lucas began, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. He wasn't sure where to start, or how much of the truth he should reveal. But Mia's innocent question had cracked something open inside him. Mia glanced at him curiously, her expression neutral but expectant. She wasn't used to hearing adults talk about their feelings, at least not the way he was about to. "I grew up in a family that didn't really understand me," Lucas continued. "My parents were always too busy, always focused on their own things. I learned to take care of myself early on. They didn't show me love the way other families do. I had to figure things out on my own." Mia was quiet for a moment, then she spoke, her words coming out slowly, carefully. "Is that why you're so good at fixing things? At making money?" Lucas smiled softly, though there was a bitter edge to it. "Maybe. I've always believed that if I worked hard enough, if I was successful enough, maybe I could fill the emptiness. I thought if I had enough, if I made it big, I wouldn't have to feel lonely anymore. But that's not how it works, is it?" Mia's eyes softened, her small hands clutching the bear a little tighter. "No," she whispered. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of their shared vulnerability hanging in the air. For the first time since he'd arrived, Lucas felt like he was seeing Mia for who she truly was, a child who had been hurt and who was trying to make sense of a world that hadn't been kind to her. "Do you ever think about your family?" Mia asked after a while, her voice barely audible. "Your real family?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. His real family. The ones who had never really seen him for who he was. The ones who had cared more about their business dealings than their son. He had tried so hard to forget them, to bury that part of his life. But the truth was, he couldn't escape it. No matter how far he ran, no matter how much success he piled up, he was still that lonely child, yearning for the connection that he never had. "I don't know," Lucas said quietly. "I think about them sometimes, but it's hard. They weren't the family I needed." Mia looked at him, her gaze softening. "Maybe they didn't know how to love you," she said, her voice quiet but full of understanding. Lucas looked at her, surprised by her insight. How could a child so young understand this so well? But then he realized, maybe it wasn't about age. Maybe it was about the purity of her heart. Mia had never learned how to protect herself from pain the way he had. She hadn't built walls of pride and ambition to hide behind. She had just been hurt and left to make sense of it all on her own. "You're probably right," Lucas admitted, his voice soft. "They didn't know how to love me." In the days that followed, Mia and Lucas's relationship shifted. There was still an awkwardness, an unspoken tension, but there was something else as well, a quiet understanding that had begun to form between them. Both of them had been shaped by their pasts. Both of them had been left wanting, but together, they were slowly starting to heal. One evening, as they sat together, eating dinner, Mia suddenly spoke up again, this time her voice more tentative than before. Do you think maybe I could have a real family one day?" she asked, her eyes wide, filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Lucas's heart twisted at the question. She was so young, and yet she had already experienced so much pain. The idea of her not having a family, of never experiencing love in the way she deserved, felt unbearable to him. "You will," he said firmly, without hesitation. "You'll have a family who loves you, Mia. You deserve that. You'll get it, I promise." For the first time, Mia's eyes shone with something other than fear. Hope. It was fragile, but it was there. We all have stories of longing and loss. Have you ever shared your own past with someone? How did it change your connection with them? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. The days began to settle into a strange, quiet routine. Lucas found himself waking up each morning with a sense of purpose that had never been present before. The constant buzz of work and deadlines had become a distant memory, replaced by the soft presence of Mia, her small footsteps padding through the hallway, the sound of her laughter when she managed to get a joke right, the way she always insisted on making sure his coffee was just how you like it before he even asked. He had never thought much about the small moments of life. He had always been so consumed with achieving success, with climbing higher and higher, that he never really took time to notice how fleeting the simple joys of connection could be. But now, with Mia, he was learning. Slowly, carefully, and with a tenderness he hadn't known he was capable of. Mia, too, was changing. She was no longer the distant, guarded child who had walked into his life with walls so high that they seemed insurmountable. She was still quiet, still cautious, but there were moments, small moments, when she would smile, when she would seek out his company, when she would share a piece of herself that she had kept hidden for so long. One afternoon, Lucas was working in the living room when he heard a faint sound, a soft thud followed by a hesitant voice. Lucas. He looked up from his papers to see Mia standing in the doorway, holding a small, slightly wrinkled drawing in her hand. Her eyes were downcast, and she shifted from foot to foot, the way she always did when she was nervous. "Hey, what's up?" Lucas asked, setting his papers down and giving her his full attention. He had learned that Mia only approached him when something was important to her, something that mattered. She took a deep breath, her small shoulders rising and falling, before she held the drawing out to him. It was a simple picture, just a stick figure family, each person drawn with a smile, holding hands. But it was the first time Mia had ever given him something like this, something that wasn't a request or a need. It was a gift. I made this for you," Mia said quietly, her voice almost too soft to hear. "It's a family, a real one. Like the one you promised me." Lucas's heart caught in his throat as he took the drawing from her. It was simple, yes, but there was so much more in it: hope, longing, trust. He felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of pride and tenderness that almost overwhelmed him. "This is beautiful, Mia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." She gave a small, shy smile, the corners of her eyes crinkling just slightly. And for the first time, Lucas saw it. He saw the real Mia, not the guarded girl he had met so many weeks ago, but the little girl who still believed in the possibility of love, despite everything that had happened to her. "I think we could be that family," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words landed like a weight, heavy and undeniable. They were simple, but they carried so much meaning. In that moment, Mia was offering something that Lucas hadn't realized he needed: the possibility of belonging. Not just to her, but to the future they could build together. That evening, after Mia had gone to bed, Lucas sat in the living room, his mind swirling with thoughts. The drawing, Mia's words, the way she had looked at him when she said them, all of it seemed to echo in his mind. He had spent so many years running away from the idea of connection, of love, convinced that it was something he didn't deserve, something that would only lead to pain. But now with Mia, he was seeing a different kind of love, one that didn't require perfection, one that wasn't conditional. For the first time in years, Lucas allowed himself to think about what it might mean to have a family. Not a family built on success, on appearances, or on the cold walls of ambition, but a family based on love, on trust, on vulnerability. He thought of Mia, her quiet hope, and he wondered if it was possible. Could they really build something like that together? As if on cue, his phone buzzed, a reminder from his assistant about an important business meeting the next day. It was a call back to his old life, the life that had always been there, just out of reach, waiting for him to return. He stared at the screen for a moment, his finger hovering over the button. The world of business, the world he had built, would always be there. It would always demand his attention, always pull him back in. But he realized, in that moment, that it wasn't the only thing that mattered anymore. Lucas put his phone down and leaned back into the couch, letting out a slow breath. Maybe, just maybe, he had been running from the wrong things all along. The next morning, Lucas woke up earlier than usual, a quiet resolve in his chest. He had spent the night thinking about Mia, about the bond they were slowly forming, and about the family she had drawn for him. It was a symbol of something so much larger than a simple picture. It was a symbol of trust, of the connection they were building piece by piece. He got up and went into the kitchen, where he prepared breakfast with a tenderness that surprised him. He made pancakes, Mia's favorite, with whipped cream and strawberries, and when it was ready he set the table, carefully placing the plates just so. It was something small, something simple, but in that moment, it felt like an offering. An offering of care, of love, and of hope for what the future could hold. When Mia came into the kitchen, her sleepy eyes still heavy with sleep, her face lit up at the sight of the pancakes. She smiled, the kind of smile that lit up her entire face, and for a moment, Lucas saw just how much she had come to trust him. "Wow, this looks amazing," she said, her voice full of wonder. "I thought you might like it," Lucas said, smiling back at her. It was a small moment, but it felt like a victory, like a step towards something bigger. They sat down together, sharing the meal, laughing over small jokes and stories. And in that moment, as Lucas watched Mia eat her pancakes with a smile, he realized that this was what mattered. This was the family that he had always needed, the one that was never about wealth, status, or control, but about connection, love, and understanding. Do you believe that family can be built, or is it something that you're born into? Have you ever found a sense of belonging in the most unexpected of places? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Everything had been going so well. Too well, Lucas thought, as he watched Mia across the room. Her small face lit up with a grin as she showed him the results of her latest school project. There were moments, fleeting but real, when it felt like they were becoming a family. A strange, imperfect, yet undeniable bond was forming between them. Mia had opened up in ways he hadn't expected, and his own walls, which had been built so high for so long, were starting to crumble. But life, Lucas knew, was never so simple. He had seen that firsthand. He had always been prepared for the worst, always ready for the other shoe to drop. And it did, in a way he could never have predicted. It started with a phone call. Lucas was in his office late one afternoon, working on an urgent project that required his full attention. The steady buzz of his phone interrupted his focus. At first, he didn't recognize the number, but then, when the caller ID flashed, his heart skipped. It was from the foster care agency. He had never expected to hear from them again. He thought Mia's situation was temporary, that they had everything under control. But now, as he answered the phone, he immediately sensed the gravity in the woman's voice on the other end. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her tone tense, "I'm afraid there's been a development in Mia's case. Her original foster family, well, they've changed their mind. They're back, and they want to take her in permanently." The words hit Lucas like a blow to the chest. He felt the air leave his lungs, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. His mind raced. "No. This can't be happening." "Excuse me," he finally managed to say, though his voice was strained. "What do you mean, they want her back?" "Mia's original foster parents have decided to re-enter the picture. They're moving back to the area, and they've requested to take Mia in again. We're sorry, but we may need to begin the transition." Lucas felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over him. Mia had been with him for weeks now. She was comfortable, she was thriving. And now they were telling him it was all about to change? How could this happen so suddenly? "But he began, his voice thick with frustration, "she's doing well here. She's finally opening up. She trusts me." "I understand, Mr. Bennett," the woman said softly. "But we have to honor the original arrangement. Mia's been through a lot, and this is what's best for her." "Best for her?" Lucas's hands clenched into fists. The words felt hollow, as though they were being said just to cover the agency's tracks. How could this be best for Mia? She had started to believe in the possibility of love. She had begun to see him as a constant, as someone who was there for her when no one else had been. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice now cold and distant, "but I can't just let her go. Not like this." The woman sighed. "Mr. Bennett, I know this is difficult. But we need to start the transition process. Mia's emotional well-being depends on it." And with that, the conversation ended. Lucas was in a daze as he hung up the phone. His mind raced, the pieces of the conversation falling into place like jagged shards. He couldn't breathe. Mia was going to be taken away. Just like that. The thought of losing her, of seeing her leave his life after everything they had built, felt like a punch to the gut. He had become so attached, so invested in their little world together. How could they just take her away? In the following hours, Lucas's frustration morphed into a deep sense of guilt. Had he done something wrong? Was this his fault? Had he somehow failed Mia? That night, when Mia came down for dinner, she noticed something was off. The warmth that had existed between them, the quiet connection, had disappeared. Lucas could feel it too, like an invisible wall between them that hadn't been there before. "Mia," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We need to talk." Mia looked up at him, her small face filled with uncertainty. What's wrong? Lucas swallowed hard, not knowing how to explain the turmoil inside him. How could he make her understand that everything they had been building, the fragile trust, the hope, was about to be ripped away? They want to move you back, Lucas said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Mia's expression faltered, her eyes searching his face, as though trying to decipher the meaning behind his words. What do you mean? Your original foster parents. They want you to go back with them. It's part of the arrangement. The words hung heavy in the air. Mia blinked, her face falling. She took a step back, her hand gripping the edge of the kitchen counter as though trying to steady herself. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't want to go back. Lucas's heart broke at the sight of her, the way she pulled away from him, her eyes wide with fear. She had been through so much already, and now she was going to lose the one person who had shown her any semblance of stability. Mia, Lucas started, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? How could he promise her anything when he didn't know how to stop this from happening? I don't want to go, Mia said again, her voice breaking. I don't want to leave you. Her words pierced Lucas's heart, and in that moment, he knew there was nothing he could do to stop the inevitable. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, calls, and discussions with the foster care agency. Lucas tried his best to make Mia's final days with him as normal as possible, but the weight of impending loss hung over them both like a dark cloud. On the day the foster parents arrived to take Mia, Lucas felt like his world was crumbling. Mia clung to him, tears in her eyes, refusing to let go. It was a quiet, heartbreaking farewell, the kind that left a raw ache in his chest. I'll miss you, Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. I'll miss you too, Lucas replied, his voice thick with emotion. You'll always be in my heart, Mia. Always. But despite his words, he knew that this was the end of something beautiful, something fragile. And no matter how much he wished otherwise, there was no way to undo what had been done. Have you ever experienced a moment of loss that felt like it shattered everything you thought you knew? How did you cope? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Lucas sat in his car outside the foster home, staring blankly ahead. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. The events of the last few days were a blur: pain, frustration, helplessness. Mia had been taken away, and nothing he had done or said could change it. She was gone, and with her, a part of him had vanished too. He had promised her that she would be loved. He had promised that she would be safe. But how could he have kept that promise when the system, the very thing that was supposed to protect her, had decided that it was time for her to go back to the family who had once abandoned her? He had done everything he could, or so he thought. But it hadn't been enough. He had tried to be the person Mia needed, to be the family she deserved, but now, he was left questioning everything. Was he strong enough to fight for her? Was he strong enough to face the fact that the system might not be on his side? The phone buzzed in his hand, snapping him out of his daze. He didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Claire from the foster care agency. She had called a few times already, but Lucas had avoided her. What was there to say? How could he ask for help when he felt so utterly powerless? With a sigh, Lucas answered the call. Mr. Bennett, Claire's voice was gentle, but there was a professional distance to it. I know this is difficult. I just wanted to remind you that Mia's transition back to her original family will be taking place tomorrow. We've made all the arrangements. Lucas's chest tightened, and he forced himself to speak. I know, he replied, his voice sounding far weaker than he wanted it to. I know it's happening. I don't understand how this is the best option for her. I understand your frustration, Claire said, her tone softening. But this is the way it has to be, Mr. Bennett. Mia's original foster parents are ready to take her in. It's the best chance for stability. Stability. The word echoed in Lucas's mind, but it felt hollow. Stability wasn't what Mia needed, not after everything she had been through. She needed someone who cared for her, someone who understood her. She needed him. He gripped the phone tighter, feeling a wave of emotion crash over him. He couldn't let this be the end. He couldn't let her slip away. That evening, Lucas went home to an empty house, the silence pressing in on him. Mia's absence filled every room, every corner. The house that had once felt like a sterile, impersonal space now seemed unbearably empty. He walked through the room slowly, touching things that had become a part of their routine, the little art projects Mia had left on the kitchen table, the stuffed bear she had always carried around, the book she had left half-read by the couch. It all hit him like a tidal wave. He couldn't lose her, not like this. He stood in the living room, feeling the weight of his decision settle on his chest. The choice before him was clear, and yet, it terrified him. He could let Mia go back to the life that had already failed her once, or he could fight for her, no matter the cost. He could become the father she needed, the family she had always dreamed of. But it wasn't that simple, was it? Taking her in permanently would be a massive shift for both of them. His world was built on business, on success, on the very things that had kept him emotionally distant for years. Could he change his entire life to become the parent Mia needed? Could he be the family she had always longed for? It wasn't a question of whether he was capable. It was a question of whether he was willing to risk everything. Lucas's thoughts raced. I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done anything like this. But I can't just stand by and watch her go back to a life she doesn't deserve. As the night grew darker, Lucas made up his mind. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, Lucas didn't wait for the agency's call. He called them first. Claire, he said, his voice firm. I'm not letting Mia go back. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Claire responded, her voice cautious. Mr. Bennett, I understand how you feel, but this decision is out of your hands. The transition process is already in motion. I don't care, Lucas replied, his voice more forceful now. I'm going to fight for her. I'm asking you to give me a chance to be her permanent guardian. Claire's silence was telling. It wasn't just paperwork that he had to navigate, it was the system. The legal barriers, the people who held the power to make decisions that impacted Mia's future. But Lucas was done waiting. He had made his choice. I'll get a lawyer, he continued, his voice steady. I don't care what it takes. I won't let Mia go back to a life where she isn't loved. Not when I can give her everything she needs. I'll have to check with the agency, Claire said hesitantly. This is going to take time, and it's not going to be easy. I don't care about easy, Lucas replied, his heart pounding in his chest. I care about her. That evening, Lucas stood outside the foster home once more. The decision had been made. He had already started the process of contacting lawyers and filing the necessary paperwork, but there was something he needed to do before anything else. He needed to tell Mia. He knocked on the door, and when it opened, he was met by the familiar face of her caseworker. Mr. Bennett, she greeted him, but her eyes immediately flickered to the worried look on his face. Mia, Lucas said, his voice soft. Can I talk to her? The caseworker nodded, stepping aside to let him in. When Mia appeared in the doorway, her eyes were full of uncertainty. But as soon as she saw him, something shifted in her expression. She hesitated, then slowly walked toward him. Mia, I want you to know something, Lucas began, his voice steady despite the nerves in his chest. I'm not giving up on you. I'm going to fight for you, and I'm going to be your family. You don't have to go back. You can stay here with me. Her eyes widened, and then slowly, a smile began to form. It was small, but it was there, the hope that had been buried for so long, now beginning to shine through. Really? She whispered. Really, Lucas replied, his heart swelling as he crouched down to her level. You're going to have the family you always deserved, Mia. I promise. And in that moment, everything changed. The walls that had once separated them crumbled, and in their place, something far stronger began to take root. Love, trust, and the unwavering bond of a family that had found each other against all odds. What would you do if you had to make the hardest decision of your life? Have you ever had to fight for something you believed in? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. In the weeks that followed, Lucas threw himself into the legal battle with the kind of determination that had always served him well in business. He met with lawyers, filed paperwork, and fought every step of the way for Mia's future. The process was long and often draining, but each day, he felt a quiet sense of certainty growing within him. He wasn't going to let her slip away again. This time, he was doing things differently. But the legal system was slow, and there were moments when Lucas doubted himself. The agency continued to push for Mia's return to her original foster family, and each time he encountered a roadblock, the doubts crept in. Was he really capable of being the father she needed? Did he have the resources to take on the responsibility of raising her? Was he enough for her? Late one evening, Lucas sat at his kitchen table, staring at a pile of legal documents. Mia was asleep upstairs, her soft breathing filling the silence of the house. The reality of what he was fighting for hit him harder than ever before. He wasn't just fighting for custody, he was fighting for Mia's future, for her sense of belonging, and for the possibility of love that she had been denied for so long. He closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair, allowing the weight of the situation to settle around him. But something inside him, something he had learned from his time with Mia, pushed him forward. He was ready to face whatever came next, no matter how difficult it might be. It wasn't just about winning a legal battle anymore. It was about proving to Mia, and to himself, that family wasn't defined by blood. It was defined by love. The day of the hearing arrived, and Lucas stood in the courtroom, his heart pounding in his chest. He had expected to feel anxious, to question every step he had taken. But today, he felt resolute. He wasn't here to play by the rules of the system. He was here to fight for Mia, to prove that he was the family she needed. The courtroom was tense. On one side, Mia's original foster parents sat, their eyes cold and distant, their lawyer poised and ready. On the other side, Lucas sat with his lawyer, his posture straight, his gaze unwavering. He knew that this battle was bigger than him, bigger than the legal jargon and the complex paperwork. It was about Mia, her future, and the love they had begun to build together. The judge called the proceedings to order, and one by one, both sides presented their arguments. Lucas's lawyer spoke about his dedication, his commitment to providing a stable, loving home for Mia. He spoke about their bond, about the fact that Mia had flourished under Lucas's care. Lucas's heart swelled as he listened, knowing that the words were true. Mia had become the light in his life, the one thing that made everything else seem unimportant. But when it was his turn to speak, Lucas stood, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Your Honor," he began, "I'm not here because it's easy. I'm not here because I want to win. I'm here because I believe Mia deserves a family, a real family. And I know that I can give her that." He paused for a moment, his gaze moving toward the small chair where Mia's empty seat had been placed. He could almost see her there, her shy smile, her hopeful eyes. He could almost hear her soft voice saying, "I wish I had a loving family." "I know I'm not perfect," Lucas continued, his voice unwavering. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that Mia has the love and stability she deserves. I'm asking you to give me that chance. I'm asking you to let me be her family." The courtroom was silent for a moment, the weight of Lucas's words hanging in the air. He could feel the tension in the room, the eyes of the judge and the others trained on him. But none of it mattered. This wasn't about winning a case. This was about doing what was right. This was about giving Mia the family she had always longed for. The judge leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on Lucas. There was a long pause before she spoke, her voice calm but decisive. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice carrying the weight of the decision she was about to make, "I believe that Mia's best interests are best served with you. I am granting you full custody of Mia, effective immediately." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He blinked, unable to process the words for a moment. Full custody. It was happening. He had won. Tears welled in his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. He had fought so hard, and now, the moment had arrived. It was real. Mia was going to stay with him. They were going to be a family. He turned to look at the empty chair beside him, where Mia's small face had been just hours before. In his mind, he saw her there again, and he smiled. That evening, when the court proceedings were over and the legal documents were signed, Lucas drove back to the foster home to pick up Mia. He had made the promise to her, and now, it was time to fulfill it. When he arrived, Mia was waiting for him, her small hands clutching her stuffed bear. She looked up at him with wide eyes, uncertain, as though afraid to believe it was real. "Mia," Lucas said softly, stepping forward. "You're coming home with me. You're staying with me. We're a family now." Her face lit up, her eyes filling with tears, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled, a real unguarded smile. "Really?" she whispered. "Really," Lucas said, his voice full of emotion. "You're my family, Mia. Always." They drove home together, the silence in the car comfortable and warm. As they entered the house, Lucas glanced at the familiar surroundings. The house that had once felt empty, distant, was now filled with the soft laughter of a child, with a sense of belonging that had been absent for so long. As Lucas tucked Mia into bed that night, he whispered a simple promise: "I'll always be here. I'm not going anywhere." Mia, her eyes already fluttering with sleep, smiled up at him. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered, her voice full of trust. And in that moment, Lucas knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. As a family. A real family. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.